been in the industry obviously for a number of years. How have you seen an increase in diversity within the energy sector and particularly within finance?
So there's been an increase in diversity, and that increase in diversity has probably come with the increase in renewables. And I don't know if that's coincidental, but I would say that it's probably not entirely coincidental because it's been the biggest growth area, it's been the biggest opportunity set for employment and for diversity to even occur. I would say that while it's grown, I don't think that it's, I think it's like the rest of corporate America. I think that there's opportunities to do better across the board. But it does give me, look, there's a lot of reason to have a lot of hope because I think another part of that's a dynamic in the sectors that I've been involved in is that we've had an aging workforce.
Yeah.
And really there's been a dialogue, at least going back as late as, or sorry, I should say as early as the late 90s, where this is a topic of conversation when you're doing diligence on businesses, when you're talking about the sector, when you're talking about key trends. And so when you have now a younger generations coming into leadership positions, diversity is just kind of increasing by generation. And so I think that's, at least it feels like that. I don't have the data to back that up, but I think that it's one of those things where we're moving in the right direction, and I think where we sit as SCR Capital, we have the chance to really kind of establish this de novo, right? I think if you're an existing organization, if you don't have a diverse culture, but you have really high integrity people who really want to deliver on that. But might be feel a little bit stuck, right? Of how do I do that if I don't have a budget for growth? Nobody deserves to be rotated out, as an example, to create room for somebody, right? These all require tough decisions that's exactly what they are. They're just tough decisions, but they're, a lot easier to put in place when you're building companies. And so maybe with a newer sector and this ethos, I may not be alone.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's definitely easier, not easier, it's never easy, but easier to do it when you're building it from the ground up rather than like retroactively go back and try and fix it and instill that in the culture. It's not just about hiring. It's about making people feel included when they're in the organization.
It's a critical part of it, right? Sorry, we're investors, right? If you you have to be able to feel vulnerable. If you have folks that are the smartest person in the room, let's say, right, and you have a wallflower that may not want to kind of extend themselves because maybe they're junior, maybe they just don't want to get into it, maybe they're unsure, but it might be the best point that changes the course of the fate of an investment, of the fate of a business. And so, and if you kind of just unwind what all of that means, you have to have that transparency and that shared vulnerability. And that's not a one-way street. And I think that's, you don't see that a lot. I think it's spoken about around organizational behavior. And maybe teams will kind of do that in kind of teamwork exercises, but I haven't seen that really be something that's adopted more broadly across firms.
So I want to talk about StreetWise Partners, a nonprofit mentoring program that you founded. What motivated you to do that?
So it was a lot of just feeling some of the inequity of the world on my shoulders. I was maybe naive, but it was 1997. I graduated Colgate University. I had my first job at PwC, and on my first day, I was being taken to some of the most lavish lunches and dinners in the city with open tab accounts, and I didn't feel like I'd done anything to deserve that at that stage. And so I felt some sort of guilt, and it was just amplified when I saw the poverty across New York City, and I had somebody homeless that would frequently warm themselves on a grate outside my apartment. And I had a cube mate who was very inspiring to me, and together, we started talking about how we could give back, and we created a 15-week mentoring organization. And so, and that grew from one site in PricewaterhouseCoopers to multiple sites with backers like Credit Suisse and Barclays and Gallup and Robert Smith. And so we're in Detroit, we're in New York City and Washington, D.C. And so I've stayed involved because of the people. It's the people that we help, found that we're able to help the mentees, we're able to help transform individuals' lives. The thesis that we did it, back in '97, I was 21. I don't know that I could have articulated it, but it was we want to change one person's life that can change a family's life, that can change a community's life, right? And that was really the whole ethos, and did it with the idea of helping one person. It ended up being worthwhile back then, and so we're now graduating north of 400 folks a year across 3 cities. And so and a lot of it I've had little to do with at this stage, but just being around the great people has been something that's and it's just a great organization.
I know I joined in with them a couple of times when I was in New York, and it really is a great organization. So I want to talk now about COVID. So there have been reports forecasting continued renewable energy growth despite COVID. That's certainly what I have seen. Do you believe that this will be the case? And how do you predict the clean energy industry will be impacted long-term by the pandemic?
I do think renewable energy will continue to grow. And I think we're going to have accelerated growth of clean energy through COVID. That's not saying that there's not going to be risks to having that kind of view around that trajectory. A lot of the renewable growth that we've seen in recent years has not been growth in electricity demand, right? So it's not the marginal new assets to fulfill the marginal new demand is renewable. It's renewable assets are coming in, and on the whole are displacing assets that are coming off, right? So the question is going to be, is that displacement going to maybe continue at the pace that it has? And what we're seeing is that even installing new renewables at the capital costs, at the long-term contracted costs that they could offer customers, is lower than some of the inefficient assets that are already on the grid, right? Still. And so betting against that continuing is betting against continued innovation in a sector that's just demonstrated it over the last 20 years, right? And with solar, it's maybe over the last 15 years. And so I think that's going to be that's going to continue to be a big part of this. I think you're going to have added areas of growth around it, but I believe it. Whether it's profitable also, and how you invest in it, what the business models look like, I think that's that'll be a different answer, because all of the efficiencies that are being driven, they include cost of capital efficiencies, right? And so if you think about trying to earn a return in some of these businesses, you have to, in my view, have a pretty optimistic or aggressive vantage point around that one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Do you think any industries in our space, or the clean energy space, will go backwards as a result, like perhaps plastics?
I think plastics is, I think you nailed it. I think that's the one. I mean, we have single-use plastics now coming back in, right? We had New York City just instituting what's probably the most ill-timed plastic bag ban, yep, right ahead of the pandemic and the unwinding of kind of people bringing their own bags to grocery stores. And so I think that was always an industry that needed some involvement, either with carrots or sticks to get it off the ground around plastics. Some way of pricing the negative externalities, I guess. So I think that they could be hurt, but I'd say conversely around recycling, I think that we're going to have an uptick around e-waste recycling, right? So whether it's our devices that we might have a bunch of in a drawer somewhere, all of these have regulations in terms of how they're supposed to be returned, how they're supposed to be recycled, or at least how they're supposed to be disposed of. Particularly as we're seeing kind of battery storage assets coming on, solar panels that are eventually going to be needing recycling. We're seeing that as something that, you know, it doesn't offset the negative impacts of plastics, but it's human safety, I think, trumps, at least in the moment, trumps the planetary safety. It feels like that's what the mindset is, if you can kind of read tea leaves from everything that's going on.
So the final question I'll ask is, where do you see the greatest growth taking place within the clean energy industry in the coming years? I know we touched on it a little bit in your previous statement. How does SCR look at that?
So I think SCR, my team and I would say, number one, it's battery storage. I think it's the most potentially transformative asset that is coming onto the grid. It's really enabled in a much better way because of the renewable growth that's preceded it over the last 10 to 20 years. And so it slots in very well in ways that other traditional assets don't necessarily. And so just the physical capabilities, the fact that it's the cost declines that are coming down, we see that as or the cost declines that are continuing because we see companies investing in the supply chain because of electric vehicles, right? And the grid actually just becomes a beneficiary of that electric vehicle supply chain. So I think that's going to be a key part of it. I think also there's more, as I was saying, a lot of our investment thesis is demand driven. And so I think what's a parallel to that in our sector is energy efficiency. So I think that anything that technology that empowers reduction in energy waste, which we know there's a lot of, I think that we're going to see a lot of opportunities around that. I think those are really probably the key areas, and these are areas of growth and a backdrop of depending on the markets that we're talking about, 5 to 20% drops in COVID. It's I think these are all sectors that probably held up relatively well. Certainly renewable assets did. And I think that resilience is going to lead to just continued interest. There is more kind of demand for resiliency here, right? And I think one of the things that we've also talked about around the demand side is, on a broad level, we see it being decarbonized, we see it being distributed, we see it being digitized, and all of that being increasingly electrified, right? And so internally, we use this term 3D&E, but it's a shorthanded way of saying that demand for whether it's electricity or industrial activity is changing, and the asset opportunity around that is transforming, and it's no longer an advantage to have a big legacy asset, maybe that is of scale, right? That needs a lot of lines and wires coming off of it, or distribution networks off of it. And I think that that's just going to continue through, despite some of the horrible kind of aspects of COVID that all of us have been wrestling with in one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and thoughts on this. I really appreciate it.
Catherine, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.